Every government, in its grand pronouncements, loudly proclaims its unwavering dedication to serving the very people it governs.
Every politician, with charismatic smiles and fervent speeches, assures us of a future brimming with stability, boundless prosperity, and relentless economic growth.
Yet beneath the dazzling lights of their public addresses, hidden behind the meticulously crafted campaigns and televised debates, there exists a profound and often unseen influence.
It's a force that operates in a realm far quieter, steeped in complex technicalities, but possessed of a power that dwarfs the visible political theater. This silent, formidable entity, the true architect of our financial destinies, is the central bank.
Unlike elected officials, central banks do not lead grand parades through city streets. They do not engage in the boisterous spectacle of electoral campaigns. Indeed, their leaders are often so far removed from public consciousness that most citizens cannot even recall their names, let alone the faces behind these immensely powerful institutions.
Nevertheless, these quiet architects hold the levers of our entire financial system. They unilaterally determine the precise quantity of money circulating within an economy,
make life-or-death decisions about which colossal financial institutions receive critical bailouts, and ultimately which banks are allowed to thrive and which are condemned to collapse. Their decisions ripple through every aspect of our daily lives. With a simple adjustment of a policy, they possess the power to make your cherished mortgage payments suddenly more affordable.
Or conversely, to erode the value of your lifelong savings until they are virtually worthless.
They can, with devastating efficiency, trigger the catastrophic collapse of a retirement fund that took decades to build. And all of this, every single life-altering decision, is enacted without the slightest need for a single vote from you, the ordinary citizen.
This is the untold secret history of central banks. How a select handful of these enigmatic institutions quietly ascended to become the undisputed, real power brokers of the modern world. To truly grasp the profound ascent of central banks, those institutions that subtly yet powerfully steer the modern world, we must journey back to the tumultuous 17th century. Across Europe, a relentless tide of warfare raged, mercilessly draining the coffers of kingdoms.
Monarchs, accustomed to their lavish lifestyles, continued to spend without restraint, leaving their governments perpetually desperate for hard currency, for gold and silver, to fuel their ambitions. In England, specifically, the resolute King William III found himself in a dire predicament. He urgently required vast sums of money to finance his ongoing brutal war against France. However, prospective lenders, acutely aware of the crown's ignominious history of defaulting on its debts, were deeply hesitant, their trust eroded by past betrayals.
It was out of this desperate need that a revolutionary new institution emerged, the Bank of England. This fledgling entity possessed an unprecedented special privilege, the power to issue notes, mere paper promises, yet crucially, these were backed by the full faith and credit of the government's colossal debt. For the very first time in English history, the circulating medium of exchange was no longer solely weighty metal coins. Instead, it was now increasingly composed of these innovative paper notes, meticulously backed by the fundamental credit of the state itself. The Bank of England thus swiftly solidified its dual role, becoming simultaneously the king's indispensable creditor and the nation's primary banker. A profound, undeniable lesson was instantly clear to all who understood its workings. Whoever held sway over the intricate flow of credit held the ultimate commanding control over the very state itself. This powerful model would soon be emulated across the continent, though Sweden, with its Riksbank founded in 1668, had been an earlier pioneer. The profound lesson learned from the Bank of England's early success resonated across the continent. Absolute control over the flow of a nation's credit was synonymous with wielding ultimate power over the very state itself. This powerful paradigm rapidly disseminated. While Sweden had pioneered its own Riksbank back in 1668, It was unequivocally the Bank of England that emerged as the definitive, influential prototype, its structure and function eagerly emulated.
Throughout the transformative 18th and 19th centuries, the concept of a central bank, inextricably linked to the state, spread its tendrils across the burgeoning nations of Europe.
These institutions became the indispensable engines for governments, perpetually hungry for reliable credit, essential for fueling their relentless wars, expanding their vast colonial empires, and driving unprecedented industrial expansion. The brutal grand scale of the Napoleonic era laid bare this symbiotic relationship between military conflict and high finance. Napoleon's formidable armies, though famed for their strategic brilliance and sheer force,
Effectively marched forward not just on the strength of gunpowder and steel, but crucially on the relentless flow of credit provided by financial institutions.
Conversely, Great Britain, fortified by its innovative central bank, possessed an unparalleled capacity to borrow vast sums. This financial muscle proved decisive, enabling it to endure and ultimately outlast the formidable might of France.
The venerable pound sterling, robustly underpinned by the steadfast Bank of England, solidified its position as the unshakable anchor of the nascent global financial system. History now revealed a stark truth. Wars were not solely decided on blood-soaked battlefields. They were just as profoundly shaped, and often ultimately won, within the intricate, calculating balance sheets meticulously maintained by these powerful emerging central banks.
The 20th century marked a profound shift. Unlike Europe, the nascent United States endured a haphazard and volatile financial landscape. State-chartered banks proliferated, each issuing their own distinct paper currency, leading to an unpredictable and fragmented system where confidence was a fragile commodity.
This inherent instability tragically culminated in the devastating panic of 1907. A seismic shockwave originated on Wall Street, specifically with the collapse of the Knickerbocker Trust Company, quickly rippling outwards, plunging the entire nation into an economic abyss. Banks shuttered their doors. Panicked depositors desperately scrambled to withdraw their life savings, and the very foundation of the American financial system trembled on the precipice of total ruin. In this moment of national crisis, it was not the federal government, but a singular, formidable figure, the titan of industry, J.P. Morgan, who stepped forward. From the opulent, wood-paneled study of his New York mansion, Morgan, a man known for his decisive, almost autocratic demeanor, summoned the nation's most powerful financiers. He reportedly locked the doors, compelling these reluctant bankers to pool their resources, injecting desperately needed liquidity into the collapsing markets, thereby arresting the panic's relentless spread. Morgan's singular act of private intervention had stabilized the American financial system, with an effectiveness that far surpassed any legislative effort by Congress. For the political establishment, this was a profoundly humiliating and alarming revelation. The incident starkly underscored a critical vulnerability. America desperately needed a robust, institutional mechanism capable of acting with Morgan's authority and agility, but one that served the national interest rather than private capital. This urgent need catalyzed a series of clandestine meetings. For years, powerful bankers and influential politicians convened in utmost secrecy at a secluded hunting lodge on Jekyll Island, crafting a monumental proposal. Their covert deliberations culminated in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which Congress ultimately sanctioned. This landmark legislation birthed the Federal Reserve System, often simply called the Fed. The Fed was meticulously designed to operate with a veneer of independence from the day-to-day vicissitudes of political cycles, yet simultaneously maintained an intrinsically deep connection to the powerful financial institutions of Wall Street. It was granted unprecedented authority to issue the nation's currency, to judiciously set interest rates, and crucially, to serve as the ultimate lender of last resort during times of financial duress. Essentially, the Federal Reserve became the new mighty engine of America's economy, a privately influenced yet publicly sanctioned entity.
At its inception, very few truly grasped the monumental scale of power that had just been concentrated within this new, ostensibly independent body. The grand experiment, this sophisticated financial engine, privately influenced yet publicly sanctioned, was poised for its ultimate trial. Few truly grasped the immense power that had silently coalesced.
The crucible arrived with World War I. The sheer, unfathomable costs of this new era of industrial warfare were simply staggering, far beyond what any nation could hope to finance through taxation alone.
It was then that the central banks decisively stepped into the breach. With an unprecedented mandate, they began to print vast quantities of money, issue government bonds, and meticulously orchestrate financial maneuvers to keep their respective governments from collapsing into insolvency. The ancient, immutable anchor of global finance, the gold standard, was summarily abandoned as nations, one after another, suspended the convertibility of their currencies. The brutal lesson was stark and clear. In times of existential crisis, when the very survival of a state is at stake, central banks will, without fail, provide the necessary financing.
The printing press, once a last-ditch emergency measure, had now officially transitioned into a primary instrument of policy.
As the war finally drew to a close, a different kind of storm raged across Europe. Inflation, a voracious beast unleashed by wartime spending, ripped through economies.
Nowhere was this more tragically evident than in Weimar Germany. Under relentless political pressure, the German Reichsbank ceaselessly printed marks, torrents of currency flowing from its presses, until the paper itself became utterly worthless, fit only for kindling.
Weimar's hyperinflation remains a chilling, infamous testament to a central bank's capacity to utterly decimate an entire economy. Yet even this catastrophic disaster, far from discrediting the central banking experiment, perversely confirmed their new, indispensable status, whether for maintaining stability or, indeed, for precipitating collapse.
The darker, more perilous side of this immense power revealed itself starkly with the onset of the Great Depression. In the booming late 1920s, a feverish wave of reckless speculation propelled markets to dizzying, unsustainable heights. Then, with a shattering roar, the speculative bubble finally burst in 1929.
Faced with an unfolding catastrophe, the nascent Federal Reserve, inexplicably, failed to act with the aggressive intervention required. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Banks collapsed by the thousands, credit froze solid, and millions upon millions of ordinary people were plunged into unemployment and despair.
Economists continue to fiercely debate whether the Fed's conservative, tight money policies exacerbated and deepened the depression, prolonging the suffering.
But one thing became undeniably, chillingly clear. The deliberate choices, or indeed the failures to act, made by a central bank could irrevocably decide the fate of millions, shaping entire generations.
A profound realization had dawned. The seemingly abstract choices made by a central bank held the tangible power to dictate the destinies of countless millions, shaping economies and individual lives.
Witnessing this immense power, governments worldwide, emerging from the ashes and devastation of World War II, understood the critical need for a new global financial architecture. They sought to coordinate central banking on an unprecedented international scale, striving for stability in a shattered world. In the midst of the ongoing conflict, during the summer of 1944, an extraordinary assembly convened. Representatives from 44 weary but hopeful nations gathered in the serene yet weighty setting of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their audacious plan was to construct nothing less than a completely new international financial system from the ground up. At the very core of this ambitious design, the mighty US dollar was to be firmly positioned, its value inextricably linked and backed by the unwavering strength of gold. This made the dollar the ultimate anchor, while all other global currencies would then be precisely pegged to it, creating a structured, interconnected web of exchange. New institutions, conceived for global oversight and stability,
The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank would rise to provide a crucial safety net and foster economic cooperation.
Yet, beneath this grand cooperative facade lay an undeniable, simple truth. The creation of the Bretton Woods system undeniably placed the United States Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury squarely at the beating heart of the entire world economy.
Financial power had shifted decisively. In this new global order, the very nature of money had fundamentally transformed. It was no longer merely a medium of exchange, but had irrevocably become the ultimate instrument of geopolitics.
For decades, the US dollar, firmly pegged to gold, stood as the unshakable heart of the global economy. Money itself transcended mere commerce. It had become the very bedrock of geopolitics, a symbol of stability and American might. But this grand illusion of an immutable financial order was destined to shatter, and it did, dramatically, in 1971.
The relentless financial strain of the protracted Vietnam War, coupled with ever-increasing domestic spending programs, exerted immense, unsustainable pressure on America's once pristine gold reserves. The nation was bleeding gold. Around the world, distrust grew, and foreign nations, sensing vulnerability, began an urgent, frantic scramble, demanding gold for their rapidly devaluing dollars.
President Richard Nixon found himself trapped in an impossible dilemma. He could stand by, helplessly watching the nation's precious gold reserves drain away, irrevocably weakening its economic foundation, or he could take a drastic, unprecedented step, sever the dollar's link to gold entirely, and thus dismantle the very system that had guaranteed global financial order for a quarter century. He chose the latter, a momentous decision that would reshape the world. In a pivotal address on August 15, 1971, President Nixon delivered the seismic announcement: the US dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. The golden anchor of the Bretton Woods system, once thought indissoluble, was violently ripped away. From that precise moment, the world plunged into an entirely new, uncharted economic era, one defined by pure fiat money. These were currencies backed not by tangible precious metals, but solely by government decree, expertly managed and often manipulated by powerful central banks. The age of financial restraint, a time when monetary expansion was inherently limited, was abruptly over. Central banks, now unfettered, found themselves endowed with unprecedented, indeed, seemingly unlimited flexibility. They were suddenly empowered to create money at will, a power they have wielded with profound and far-reaching consequences ever since. The power of central banks, their unbridled flexibility to create money at will, has been dramatically showcased throughout the crises of the last half-century. We recall the early 1980s, a time when runaway inflation threatened to destabilize the very fabric of the American economy. With grim determination, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, a figure of resolute conviction, made the agonizing decision to hike interest rates to an unprecedented nearly 20%. This drastic action, a surgical strike against inflation, plunged the nation into a brutal, albeit necessary, recession. Yet, from the ashes of economic hardship, trust in the US dollar was painstakingly restored. The Federal Reserve had powerfully demonstrated its capacity to wield immense power, like a colossal hammer reshaping the entire economy with a singular, decisive policy. Fast forward to 2008. The global financial system, a complex web of interconnected markets, teetered on the brink, then spectacularly imploded, threatening a worldwide economic collapse. In response, a unified front of powerful central banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan, unleashed an unprecedented torrent of monetary intervention. They engaged in what became known as quantitative easing, a process where trillions of dollars, euros, and yen were conjured into existence, not just to bail out failing banks, but to desperately prop up crumbling markets. For the titans of Wall Street, this massive infusion of liquidity was nothing short of salvation, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent economic sea. But for millions of ordinary savers and diligent workers, it felt like an insidious form of theft.
The era of persistently low interest rates, combined with soaring asset prices, created a stark divide, enriching the already wealthy few while relentlessly punishing the diligent many who watched their savings dwindle in value.
Then came 2020, a year marked by a global pandemic, and the monetary printing presses went into an unimaginable overdrive. Central banks worldwide, acting in concert, printed currency on a scale that dwarfed all previous efforts.
Trillions flowed into the economy through emergency stimulus checks, corporate bailouts, and comprehensive rescue packages, all conjured at the mere stroke of a keyboard.
The balance sheets of these major financial institutions, once carefully managed, exploded to levels no one believed possible, swelling to astronomical figures that defied conventional economic wisdom. The consistent justification for these monumental actions was always the same: to maintain stability, to prevent a complete societal breakdown.
But the cost was profound and far-reaching: rampant inflation, dangerous asset bubbles inflating across markets, and the quiet, unsettling realization that the very definition of money itself had become fluid, now mutable at the whim of unelected central bankers.
This is the stark, undeniable truth that emerged. Central banks are not merely neutral referees overseeing a fair economic game. They are, in fact, the ultimate power brokers, silently and profoundly deciding who bears the brunt of economic suffering and who ultimately prospers.
This is the hidden truth, a revelation many refuse to acknowledge. Central banks are far from neutral referees. They are, in fact, the ultimate power brokers, wielding an immense, unelected authority. It is they who, from their insulated boardrooms, make the grim decisions on who will suffer the crushing weight of recessions and who will be extended a lifeline of rescue.
They determine which venerable institutions will weather the storm of a financial crisis and which will be left to tragically collapse. They possess the power to deliberately inflate away national debts, subtly eroding the value of savings, or to trigger excruciating deflationary pain that cripples economies. These profound decisions, made by a select few, reach far deeper into the fabric of your daily life, impacting your future and prosperity more profoundly than any democratic election could ever hope to.
And yet, remarkably, they operate behind an impenetrable curtain of dizzying complexity. Terms like interest rates, liquidity facilities, and bond purchases are not merely technical terms. They are a calculated financial jargon designed to obscure the stark reality. These powerful institutions, far removed from public scrutiny, possess the singular capacity to create money out of thin air and allocate vast sums of credit on a scale no private actor, no matter how wealthy, could ever conceivably dream of.
With every audacious intervention, every desperate attempt to stabilize markets, central banks incrementally expand their already formidable role. Each time they resort to printing vast new sums of fiat money to rescue collapsing markets, they inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, render the entire global financial system more hopelessly dependent on their next inevitable rescue. Every massive bailout, every strategic liquidity injection, only reinforces the dangerous expectation that the next crisis will be met with the very same unprecedented intervention. The cumulative result is a global economy, much like an addict, now entirely reliant on the constant, unwavering support of these central institutions.
The inherent contradictions within this system are now starkly mounting, glaringly apparent for all to see. Governments, emboldened by this perceived safety net, consistently run record deficits, operating under the implicit assumption that their central banks will forever maintain artificially low interest rates. Financial institutions, in turn, take increasingly reckless risks, secure in the knowledge that central banks will inevitably step in to prevent catastrophic failure. Investors, observing this pattern, confidently chase asset bubbles, convinced that the Fed put, the implicit promise of market support, will always protect their speculative gambles. But history, that sternest of teachers, repeatedly demonstrates that such grand illusions, no matter how comforting, always, eventually crack.
Investors, caught in a frenzied pursuit of speculative bubbles, often find solace in the false confidence that entities like the Federal Reserve System, the powerful central bank, will always intervene to protect their interests, a phenomenon known as the Fed put.
Yet, the unforgiving annals of history serve as a stark reminder. Such illusions, no matter how comforting, are destined to shatter. Consider the venerable Bank of England, its very credibility severely tested and shaken amidst the turbulent financial upheavals of the 18th century, a time of immense uncertainty in England.
Or recall the devastating collapse of the Reichsbank in Germany, which plunged an entire nation into the abyss of hyperinflation, reducing fortunes to worthless paper.
And who could forget the grand design of the Bretton Woods system, which, after decades of global influence, ultimately crumbled into obsolescence in 1971, marking a pivotal shift away from the gold standard and the fixed exchange rate system, led by figures like President Richard Nixon. Every intricate financial architecture, no matter how brilliantly conceived or seemingly indestructible, inexorably reaches a critical breaking point. So, what profound implications does this relentless cycle hold for you, the individual navigating this complex world?
It demands an essential recognition. It is central banks, not the elected politicians, who are the true, often unseen, managers of our collective money.
When they choose to subtly inflate the currency, your hard-earned wages diminish in value, buying less than before. When they decide to tighten monetary policy, the interest rates on your mortgage could shockingly double, altering your financial future overnight. And when they orchestrate market rescues, the powerful asset owners rejoice in their gains, while diligent savers, paradoxically, find their efforts eroded and their wealth diminished. It means grasping the fundamental truth that the entire global economy functions on a delicate foundation of trust, and trust, as history repeatedly demonstrates, is an incredibly fragile commodity. Should people lose their collective faith in major global currencies, like the US dollar, the euro, or the Japanese yen, no amount of monetary intervention by central banks can ever print true credibility back into existence. It means internalizing the crucial lesson that genuine resilience, your personal safeguard against economic turbulence, does not reside in the hollow promises whispered by bankers or the fleeting assurances of monetary policy. Instead, it is firmly rooted in real assets that cannot simply conjure into being at will. Think of the enduring value of gold, the tangible security of land, the irreplaceable power of unique skills, and the sustainable strength of productive businesses. These are the timeless bulwarks that have steadfastly endured every single collapse of monetary trust throughout history. The secret history of central banks is in reality no secret at all. Its chapters are explicitly written in the grim pages of every financial crisis, etched into every massive bailout, and spiraling upward in every relentless wave of inflation and hyperinflation. These formidable institutions were originally conceived to serve the interests of governments, often finding their initial strength and purpose by financing the catastrophic costs of wars. They expanded their formidable influence by stepping in to stabilize recurring financial crises, presenting themselves as indispensable guardians of stability. And today, they stand firmly at the very heart of an immense financial empire, an intricate web of power that stretches across the entire globe. They are not chosen by popular vote. They are not accountable in the transparent and direct manner that parliaments or presidents are held responsible. Yet, their far-reaching decisions often shape the trajectory of your daily life more profoundly than almost any law ever passed. This, then, is the enduring paradox of modern finance. The very individuals we never cast a single vote for wield ultimate control over the money we absolutely cannot live without. If this perspective has offered you a fresh insight into the hidden forces at play, then consider subscribing to delve deeper. The critical answers to our future are not obscured in some distant tomorrow. They are powerfully illuminated within the profound lessons of the past.